My dad stood at the center of the banquet hall. His colleagues and lifelong friends gathered around to honor him for decades of service. Glasses clinked, speeches filled the air, and laughter rose from every corner. I had been sitting quietly at one of the back tables, hands fidgeting nervously with the napkin, unsure whether to go up and speak or just disappear before anyone noticed me. For years I had felt like the outsider in my own family, the one who never lived up to expectations, the one who carried invisible failures like chains around my neck. But nothing could have prepared me for what he said that night. When his turn to speak came, my dad thanked his colleagues, his old friends, even the people who worked under him. Then, his eyes found mine in the crowd. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd finally see me. Maybe he'd finally acknowledge me in front of everyone as his son, his family. Instead, his voice hardened, his lips curled, and he said words I'll never forget. "And to my son, the biggest disgrace to this family. I pray one day you'll learn responsibility." The hall went quiet. Some people laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a joke. But I knew my father meant every syllable. My chest caved in, my face burned, and I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. That night, humiliation carved itself into my bones. I left early, walking out into the cold night air with tears stinging my eyes. His words replayed like a cruel echo. The biggest disgrace. I thought of every time I had tried to win his approval. My short-lived attempts at college. The small jobs I took that never seemed enough for him. The hobbies he called waste of time. He always wanted me to be a version of himself, strong, disciplined, respected, but I wasn't him, and in his eyes that meant I was nothing. For weeks after I spiraled, I barely left my apartment. My phone buzzed with messages from relatives telling me to brush it off or prove him wrong, but the weight of shame crushed me. Then one night, sitting in the dark, I realized I had two choices: live under the shadow of his words forever, or build a life so full of purpose that even his cruelest sentence would lose its power. I started small. I went back to the one thing that always gave me peace: writing. Late nights turned into early mornings, pages filled with stories I'd been carrying for years. I worked during the day at a cafe to cover rent, but every free moment I poured into my craft. Slowly I started sharing my stories online. At first, barely anyone read them, but then something shifted. One story about growing up under constant pressure went viral. Strangers messaged me, saying they felt seen for the first time. That was when I realized my voice mattered. Still, the road wasn't easy. There were rejections from publishers, long nights when exhaustion screamed louder than hope, and moments when doubt crept back in, whispering my father's words. But each time, I reminded myself why I started. I wasn't chasing his approval anymore. I was building something for me. Over the years, my audience grew. My stories turned into a book, and that book became a bestseller. Invitations started coming, book signings, interviews, panels. For the first time, I felt proud to introduce myself, not as someone's son, not as someone failing expectations, but as myself. The turning point came years later, when my father fell ill. I walked into his hospital room, unsure of what to expect. He looked older, weaker, his eyes softer than I remembered. When he saw me, he didn't speak at first. But then, his voice cracked as he whispered, "I was wrong. I thought breaking you would make you stronger. But you built yourself, and you're more than I ever was." I didn't know whether to cry or stay silent. But in that moment, I realized something important. His words at that party no longer defined me. They had fueled me, yes, but my success, my resilience, my journey, it was all mine. If you've ever been told you're not enough, if you've ever been humiliated by someone you wanted love from, remember this: you are not the sum of their words. You have the power to rewrite your story. My father's cruelty lit the fire in me, but it was my own choice to rise from the ashes. And that's why I'm sharing this with you now. Because maybe you're sitting there, doubting yourself, carrying scars from someone else's judgment. But let my story be proof. You can take even the deepest wound and turn it into your greatest strength. So if this touched you, if you believe in rising above pain and proving yourself on your own terms, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this isn't just my story, it's ours. And I promise, the best chapters of your life are still waiting to be written. The weeks after the hospital visit replayed in my head like a film. His apology was short, almost fragile, but it carried the weight of decades. Yet deep down I knew forgiveness wasn't something spoken, it was something lived. I remember sitting by his bedside one evening, The machines hummed softly, casting a steady rhythm in the room. He looked at me and whispered, "Do you hate me?" I swallowed hard. I hated what you said, I admitted. I hated the years you made me feel like I was less. But hate? No. If I hated you, I wouldn't be here. For the first time I saw tears in his eyes. My father, the man who never cried, who always stood tall, whose words could cut steel, let his face soften. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "I thought if I pushed hard enough, you'd never be weak, but all I did was push you away." Those words shook me more than his insult years ago, because behind them was something I had never recognized in him. Fear. My father was afraid. Afraid I'd fail, afraid the world would crush me. And in his clumsy, brutal way, he had tried to harden me, not realizing he was breaking me instead. Over the next months, I visited him often. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just sat in silence. Slowly, the wall between us began to crumble. He asked about my writing, about the people who read my work. He asked if I'd brought a copy of my book. When I handed it to him, his frail fingers traced my name on the cover. "I never thought this name, our name, would be on a book," he whispered. One night, he asked me to read aloud. So I sat by his bed and read him one of my stories, the one about a boy trying to earn his father's love. When I finished, he had tears streaming down his cheeks. "That's us," he said. And for the first time, I realized healing isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about showing up, page after page, moment after moment, until the wound slowly learns how to close. But life didn't slow down. As my career grew, opportunities came that terrified me. TED Talks, lectures at universities, even standing on stage in front of thousands. The boy who once hid at the back of a room during his father's retirement party now stood under lights, holding microphones, telling his story. And every time, I thought of those words, the biggest disgrace. They didn't sting anymore. They empowered me. Because I had transformed them into fuel. I remember one particular event, my largest book tour signing in New York. Hundreds of people stood in line. A young girl stepped forward, barely 17, her hands trembling as she handed me her copy. She whispered, "My mom says I'm worthless, but your book saved me." Tears filled her eyes. I signed her book, but more importantly, I looked her in the eyes and said, "You're not worthless. You're a story waiting to be written." That night I cried in my hotel room, because I realized my pain had become someone else's hope. My scars had become someone else's map, and maybe that was the point all along. Years later, at my father's funeral, I stood at the podium with the same crowd who had once heard him call me a disgrace. My voice didn't shake this time. "My father was a complicated man," I said. "He didn't always know how to show love. But he taught me something, how to rise when you've been knocked down. For that, I'll always be grateful." There was silence. And then applause, not for me, but for the truth, the messy, painful, beautiful truth of family. As I walked away from the podium, I felt peace, not because my father had changed completely, not because every wound had healed, but because I had chosen not to let his words define me anymore. And that's the message I want you to take. People will hurt you, sometimes the ones closest to you. They'll say things that scar, they'll make you doubt your worth. But in the end, their words are not your destiny. You are. So if you're watching this right now, ask yourself, what story are you writing? Are you still living in the shadow of someone else's judgment, or are you ready to step into your own light? If my journey tells you anything, it's this: you can rise from being called a disgrace to being someone others look up to. You can turn rejection into purpose, humiliation into strength, and brokenness into beauty. And if you believe in that message, if you believe it's time to take your pain and build something greater, then don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because this channel is about more than stories. It's about reminding you that you are capable of rewriting your life, no matter where you started. Your story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning.